Late Night Health continues. This is going to be really interesting. There's a documentary coming out, and it's called Dying to Know. It's a documentary about Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. It will, as the press release says, it'll entertain and fascinate you. We're going to talk to the producer-director, Gay Dillingham, right now. Gay, welcome to Late Night Health.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Timothy Leary, of course, is known for his work in psychedelic drugs. He encouraged it. What was it? What was the line?
Tune in, turn on, and drop out.
That's it. That was it. And
that got him in a lot of trouble too, didn't it?
It sure did. It sure did. How did you get interested in the relationship between the two guys and with their experimenting with drugs?
Well, it has multiple layers, like baklava, of answers, and it does go pretty deep and personal, considering I started this in 1995 and then set it down for a lot of years and picked it back up because it just kept haunting me in a good way. There was some really beautiful, interesting footage. And the way it started, it was in 1995 when Timothy had announced in the media he was dying and was having dinner with good friends, and we said, this is a historical moment, what could we do? And so my husband at the time said, let's bring Ram Dass down from the Bay Area and put him together with Tim, which was a really great idea, and I wouldn't have come up with that. I knew of both of them separately because I was born in 65, so I didn't live through their Harvard years.
So that means you're a child today. Okay, go ahead.
A child. That's, I like being called a child. So anyway, what was fascinating to me was this relationship, and that's what is the portal of the entire film. And it's history, but it's also very contemporary because these two guys, in their very unique ways, has a very unusual conversation about life and death and drugs and sacred medicine and things that are really kind of up in the zeitgeist for us again now, with a lot of this research coming back. And of course, Leary was blamed for a lot of the research getting shut down because he really was a missionary for these psychoactive, mind-altering or mind-expanding drugs, as was Ram Dass.
Right.
But Timothy certainly pushed the envelope and got put in prison for almost 4 years, of which 2.5 was solitary confinement. And in just getting to know them at the end of Tim's life, Ram Dass was the first person he called when he found out he was dying, because in having, all those experiences of ego death together, if you will, and they wrote the book, The Psychedelic Experience, together, which was based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, how to lead a psychedelic session in a way that's meaningful, and so it was a way to practice ego death. And so fast forward.
What do you mean by ego death?
Well, if used well, and these guys really helped promote the idea of set and setting. You don't just launch into these very powerful medicines without a lot of intention and forethought and who you're with, what's the condition of your own mind and body. It's if used medicinally, it's certainly not recreational, because they can be really, really powerful tool in a life. So the ego death, how to practice letting go of the ego while we're alive so we can live more fully. And that was something that they uniquely, as two Harvard professors, really were interested in the early 60s. And so they started the legal sanctioned experiments with graduate students at Harvard. And so by the time I came across the story, I realized, I had just inherited these kind of media caricatures of who these men were. And the men I actually met were so real.
Gay, what were these guys like? You said they're so real. What were each of these internationally known men like personally?
Well, I think what really attracted me, for someone that didn't, I came in a little late. I was born in 65. So they had been so glorified or so demonized. And what really attracted me was their human stories and their relationship and and I quickly could see how they had, through their relationship, and so much of life happens in relationship. They really, whether people know who they are or not, they changed our life, in the sense of Ram Dass having brought much of the Eastern wisdom and traditions over to the West, and both of them really kind of pushing the envelope and probing the edges of consciousness at a time when it was very threatening. So, what was it like to be the? Well, seeing Tim. The first time I saw Tim in the '80s, I was not all that attracted to him because I'd only really seen The Showman, the guy that was out, the lecture circuit and so forth. And but fast forward to when he was dying, and obviously getting real and more vulnerable. And then when we put this conversation together, the filmmakers, our friends, put the conversation together in Tim's home and brought Ram Dass down. To see Tim through that lens of Ram Dass's love was a whole new experience for me, to see Tim. And so I realize in our culture, because we're so good at judging and chewing up and spitting out, that it's not very often in the media you get to really look at someone with a lens of love and see the totality of their life. So it's really not, it's a biography of each of these men, but mostly a biography of their relationship and how they affected our culture. And
did they love each other? I don't mean, did they truly love each other as friends?
Yes, they say they're soulmates, and that's what comes out in the film. And Ram Dass also says because he was gay, he was basically able to be that support system for Tim's vision to find flight and to get further out, but that was not always all fun and games. That's also why they then kind of moved apart for a number of years as well. And that's when Ram Dass went to the East and wrote Be Here Now. But they very much loved each other, and it was not a physical relationship, but it was a very powerful, deep soul relationship. And so to have them together at the end of their lives and having Ram Dass be able to coach the people around Tim as he was dying, how to be with a dying person, because Ram Dass had started the Dying Project with Stephen and Audrey Levine and had worked midwifing dying for many decades. So it was kind of a perfect way to reunite them. And so the film started with this conversation in '95 before Tim died, and then I got interviews with them before Tim died, and then right before Ram Dass's stroke. And the film has 80 years of footage beginning to end, so it's a pretty big, beautiful arc. And Ram Dass, of course, is still alive and lives in Maui, and still, very much teaching now a whole other younger generation that are finding out who he is.
And about being here now.
Yeah.
The
hardest part of all, be here now.
Boy, being in the moment is difficult. How, in producing the film, in creating the film, how did it affect Gay Dillingham?
Another very layered, deep question. But, well, it started out spontaneously in terms of, let's put these guys together. But then anything that holds on to you for 20 years, is pretty deep. And in some ways it's autobiographical for me because I heard much of what goes on inside my own inner dialogue, inner heart about these tough subjects, whether it's death, drugs. I was a little Ram Dass, a little Tim. You know what I mean? And I realized other people probably have those same kind of internal conversations going on as well. And I did set the project down for a lot of years, but it kept coming back to me for a number of reasons, which I'm happy to share. I'm not sure how long it'll take, but it kind of in a nutshell, I'd done, when I wasn't making films, I stopped and started a couple environmental companies with my husband, environmental technology companies, and also worked for 8 years under Governor Richardson doing environmental management for the state of New Mexico. So I was deeply involved with climate change since the 80s, as well as nuclear weapons, and, here we are at the headwaters of the nuclear weapons industry.
Right.
So I kept asking myself, I got fired from my public service after I did these climate change regulations. And and I can thank my current Republican governor because she gave me the time to get back to my film. And I went into a pretty deep meditation after that because I said, why is all the information out there and we can't seem to do anything about it, whether it's weapons or climate change? And
or
the more
drugs.
I sat with that...
Or drugs.
Excuse me?
Or drugs.
Drugs. Exactly. The more I sat with that question, I thought, well, it's really because we have such a kind of warped, upside-down relationship to our own mortality, to death. We don't seem to be able to talk to it, hold it on our shoulder. We don't see ourselves in the circle of nature, which is life and death. So how are we going to tackle these other, big questions? So I realized that it's really a culture shift, and these guys had a lot to say about culture shift on these very fundamental questions. So that's what attracted me, and it was through their kind of insights and trials and tribulations, kind of a cosmic buddy film. We know a good story is really...
it's a coming-of-age film.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a rites of passage, whether it's about drugs and kids wanting to, expand consciousnness today, or about the rites of passage when we leave our body at the end of this, when the spacesuit is worn out. But it's all those little mini deaths that we need to go through with our ego to live more fully. So it's got a lot of levels, and I put the history together just to say who's having these kind of very lightened conversations.
The
so
film,
it's
by
as
the
much
way,
contemporary as it is historical.
The film is going to premiere here in Southern California in Los Angeles at the Laemmele Royal on Santa Monica Boulevard on June 17th. And it's I guess you're having premieres throughout the country. You said something about Ram Dass that piqued my interest. You said he was like a midwife for dying?
Yes. When he started the Dying Project. Can I add one thing, though, before we slip off of it? Because it's
sure.
kind of an important part of our process.
Yes.
So, yeah, we're going to be at the Laemmele. Thank God for the Laemmele, Greg Laemmele. These places, these theaters that allow us to have our modern campfire where we get to go tell our stories, right? So it's the 17th through the 23rd at the Royale.
Gotcha.
And every night we're going to have really interesting speakers come in, whether they're scientists that have worked with these substances, various people that intersect the story and or the subject matter.
Well, what we'll do is we'll have a link on our website so that people can take a look at all of that information easily. Just go to latenighthealth.com, look under Gay Dillingham, and there'll be a whole information about the film Dying to Know. We'll also have her featured in an upcoming newsletter from Late Night Health as well. All right, we're going to take some time out. When we come back, I want to talk some more about this, and I want to talk a little bit about the drugs. I like to be in control personally, but let's talk about the mind-expanding psychedelic drugs of the 60s with our guest, Gay Dillingham. More coming up. Don't go away as Late Night Health continues.
You're listening to Late Night Health with Mark Allen. The show continues in a moment.